The encounter. The air was thick with the alien scent of metal and burning chemicals. His ship had crashed, leaving him stranded on a hostile planet. A human, far from home, with nothing but a damaged vessel and a fading hope. His name was Tom, and he knew that this was the end. He had no choice but to surrender. Through the shattered windows of his wrecked ship, Tom could see the creatures approaching. Tall, with dark, glimmering skin and eyes that seemed to pierce through everything. They were the Arxians, a race known for their cruelty. They didn't just capture you. They tore you apart, broke you, and used you to fuel their hunger for control. Tom's pulse raced. Sweat trickled down his neck. His heart thudded in his chest, but he had no choice. The Arxians had weapons that could reduce his body to ashes in seconds. If he ran, he'd only die faster. He couldn't fight them, so he had to think of something else, something that might save his life. He tried to steady his breathing, the silence of his ship only broken by the sound of footsteps growing louder. The hatch creaked open, and in walked the Arxian leader. His name was Korth, a being whose presence commanded fear. Tom's mind spun. What could he do? How could he survive this? The only thing he had was his mind, and he would have to use it. As Korth entered, the alien's tall form towered over him. His piercing gaze locked onto Tom, and a cold smile spread across his face. Korth spoke in a low, guttural voice that made Tom's skin crawl. "You will speak, human," Korth growled. "You will tell us everything about your species, your technology, your secrets." Tom's body trembled, but he refused to show fear. He swallowed hard, looking into Korth's unblinking eyes. If he gave them what they wanted, he would never make it out of here alive. So, instead of speaking, he remained silent. Korth narrowed his eyes. "You think Lens will save you?" he sneered. "You will learn pain like you have never imagined." But Tom's mind was working. He couldn't let the fear take over. Pain would be inevitable, but maybe he could shift the game. He had one option, one that could change everything. If he could make Korth feel something unexpected. "I have a proposal," Tom said, his voice steady despite the panic inside. Korth cocked his head, intrigued. "Speak quickly, human," he ordered, though there was a glimmer of curiosity in his voice. Tom swallowed. "You want information, right? But what if I could offer you something better? What if, instead of pain, I could give you something pleasurable?" Korth's eyebrows furrowed. "What is this madness you speak of? We do not know pleasure, only power and pain." Tom felt the weight of Korth's gaze. "I know your kind. I've studied you. Your people thrive on dominance, control, and fear. But that doesn't mean you understand all there is to experience. Maybe I can show you something different." The alien leader remained silent for a moment, as if weighing Tom's words. "You dare to suggest that you can teach me something?" Korth's voice grew cold. "You are an insect, nothing more than a tool to be used." Tom didn't back down. "Maybe, but even insects can surprise you. And right now, I'm offering you a chance to experience something you never have before, without the need for pain." Korth's expression shifted from anger to something more subtle. Confusion? Intrigue? Tom couldn't tell, but it was enough. "You want to turn the tables, human," Korth said slowly. "You want me to believe that you can offer something better than what we've known for centuries?" Tom nodded. "I do. I'm asking you to trust me, just for a moment. Instead of taking my life, give me the chance to show you what I mean, just once. If you don't like it, I'll give you whatever you want. But if you do, you'll see that there's more to life than pain." The alien leader stood there for a long time, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. His gaze never left Tom, but for the first time, it wasn't filled with hatred or disdain. It was something else, something Tom had never expected. Finally, Korth spoke. "You have one chance, human. If you waste it, I will not hesitate to destroy you." Tom's heart raced. He didn't know if he had convinced the alien or if this was just a game, but this was his only shot. He had to make it count. Korth stepped back, waiting, as if daring Tom to make the next move. Tom took a deep breath. He was in uncharted territory now, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. This was his moment to either live or die. He couldn't just give up. The alien's curiosity. Korth's cold gaze remained fixed on Tom. The alien leader's massive frame loomed above him, but for the first time since their encounter, the threat in his eyes seemed less certain. Tom had done the unthinkable. He had spoken of pleasure, not pain, to an alien who had never known anything but the latter. And now, Korth was questioning everything. Tom's heart hammered in his chest, but he didn't flinch. This was the moment he had been waiting for, a crack in the alien's unyielding exterior, and he had to make it wider. The air between them was thick with tension, and Tom could almost feel the swirling conflict inside Korth's mind. "Do you think I am so weak that I would fall for your human tricks?" Korth's voice was low, but there was a trace of uncertainty buried beneath his arrogance. Tom stayed calm, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not asking for you to fall for anything. I'm asking you to consider something that has never crossed your mind before. You've been taught that strength is in dominance, in pain. But what if there's a different kind of power?" Korth shifted, a slight movement, but it was enough. He leaned forward, studying Tom, with renewed interest. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was pregnant with anticipation. "You speak of power," Korth murmured, his voice laced with curiosity. "But I am the leader of my kind. I know strength. I know how to dominate. I do not need your ideas of power." Tom could see the cracks forming, like the delicate web of an insect's cocoon being torn apart. The Arxians had a deep need for control, but Korth was beginning to question whether that control had limits. Could he, no, should he, let go of the rules he had always known? "It's not about weakness," Tom replied, his voice steady. "It's about control in a different way. You can dominate, but it's like holding the reins of a wild beast. What if instead of holding on tighter, you let the beast choose to follow you?" Korth's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Tom thought he had gone too far. The Arxian leader had been taught to rule with an iron fist. To suggest that control could be earned through kindness or understanding was blasphemous to his people. But Tom saw something flicker in Korth's gaze, something that wasn't anger or judgment, but curiosity. "You speak in riddles, human," Korth said, his voice darker now. "You claim I don't understand power, but you offer me nothing but words. Words that will not stop my soldiers from taking your life when I see fit." "I'm not asking for your soldiers to listen," Tom replied, feeling the weight of the moment. "I'm asking you to listen. Just you. Only you." The alien leader's expression shifted again, this time to something more contemplative. "And if I choose not to?" he asked, his tone cold once more. Tom's mind raced, but he knew he couldn't back down now. "Then you'll never know what could have been," he said simply. "You'll remain in the shadow of your own power, never realizing that true strength doesn't come from dominance, but from connect. Ion, you'll keep fighting to control, but you'll never be free." Korth tilted his head. Was that doubt, or was it mere amusement? He seemed to consider the human's words for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. "You think I am trapped by my own power?" Tom met his gaze, unflinching. "I think you're trapped by your own fear." There was a long, charged silence, the weight of Tom's words hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. For the first time, Korth's confidence seemed to waver, and the look he gave Tom was no longer one of hostility, but of uncertainty. "You are an interesting specimen, human," Korth said, stepping back slowly, his eyes never leaving Tom. "No one has ever dared speak to me like this before. Your words will not save you, but they have intrigued me. Perhaps you are not entirely useless after all." Tom could feel his heart slow, the adrenaline of the moment fading, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of hope. "All I ask is a chance to show you," he said softly. Korth's face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes told a different story. "I will give you one chance, human. But if this fails, you will regret it." Tom nodded, knowing that this was the only chance he had. The power had shifted, even if only slightly. The battle for his life wasn't over, but now it was more than just survival. It was a battle for understanding between two very different species, and that understanding could mean the difference between life and death. The human's strategy. The room was silent except for the low hum of the energy cells powering the alien ship. Korth stood across from Tom, the cold metal walls of the chamber reflecting the strange glow of alien technology. The leader's gaze lingered on Tom, no longer with the icy contempt that had marked their first meeting. There was something different now, something Tom hadn't anticipated. Korth's eyes weren't just filled with judgment anymore. They were filled with curiosity, the kind of curiosity that could either lead to discovery or destruction. Tom knew this was his moment, the one chance he had to prove that kindness could be more powerful than the brutal control Korth had known his entire life. Korth's voice broke the silence. "You say I do not understand power, but what I know is this. The strong rule. The weak perish. We have dominated countless races, made them bow to our will, and yet, you think I am wrong?" Tom's mind raced as he sought the right words. He had already given his pitch, peace over violence, connection over control, but this wasn't just about convincing Korth anymore. This was about proving that the alien leader had more to gain by embracing the unknown. If Tom could plant the right seed of doubt, Korth's empire of dominance could crumble. "You're right about one thing," Tom said slowly, choosing his words with care. "You have dominated others, but domination is a fragile thing. It's built on fear. It's not true strength." Korth's sharp gaze flickered for just a moment, and Tom seized the opportunity. "True power comes from trust. It's a connection that can't be broken by force. You think you control everything, but in reality, you're enslaved to your own need for control." Korth's brow furrowed in confusion. "You dare speak of slavery when you are in my grasp? When your life is mine to take?" Tom stood tall, refusing to cower. "I'm not talking about my life, Korth. I'm talking about your soul. The part of you that is always afraid. You cling to power because you fear losing it. But what if there's no need to fear anymore? What if you could let go?" Korth stepped forward, his dark eyes narrowing. "You speak of letting go, but you do not understand the weight of power. You do not know what it is like to carry the responsibility of an entire race. What would you have me do, human? Give it all a P for what? Peace?" He scoffed, the sound echoing in the cold room. Tom took a deep breath. "No, not peace. What I'm offering is freedom. The freedom to live without the constant fear of losing control. You don't have to carry the weight of your people's power on your shoulders alone. There's another way." Korth paused, his eyes locked on Tom's. The air between them seemed to pulse with an energy that neither could deny. For the first time since their confrontation began, Korth didn't look like the unshakable leader. Instead, he looked human, vulnerable, even. Tom saw it, just a flicker in Korth's eyes, but it was enough. He was getting through. "What are you suggesting?" Korth asked, his voice no longer filled with contempt, but with genuine curiosity. Tom stepped closer, the space between them now charged with the possibility of change. "I'm offering you a chance to see the world through a different lens, a chance to experience connection, trust, and pleasure, not as weakness, but as a new form of strength. You don't need to dominate to feel powerful. You can lead through understanding." The silence that followed was deafening. Korth's expression remained unreadable, but Tom could see the struggle within him. The leader had spent his entire life shaping his existence around pain and dominance. Could he really give all that up for something so Different? I was trained to lead with strength, to strike fear into the hearts of my enemies. Korth finally spoke, his voice softer than before. You ask me to abandon everything I've known. Tom nodded. It's not about abandoning it, Korth. It's about evolving. Power doesn't have to be a chain. It can be a bond. Korth stood still for what felt like an eternity. His mind raced, torn between the life he knew and the life Tom was offering. He was a leader of an entire race. Could he truly let go of the old ways? Was it even possible to change? I will not be your puppet, Korth muttered, more to himself than to Tom. But Tom heard it. There was a trace of fear in Korth's voice, a fear of the unknown, a fear of losing everything. And yet Tom could see the tiniest crack in Korth's armor, the smallest sign of doubt. No one is asking you to be anyone's puppet, Tom said, his voice gentle yet firm. I'm asking you to be free, free to lead in a way that's never been done before, free to be more than just the leader of a race, free to be the leader of a new way forward. Korth didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned away and paced slowly around the room. Tom watched him carefully, wondering if he had made any real impact. Korth stopped near the window, looking out into the endless stars. His silhouette was framed by the vastness of space, and for a brief moment, he seemed so small, so alone. When he turned back, there was something different in his eyes. Not fear, not contempt, but something uncertain, something almost human. I will consider what you say, human, Korth said at last, his voice steady. But know this, I am not easily swayed. You will have to prove that your way can work. Tom gave a small, hopeful smile. I will, Korth. I'll prove it. For the first time, Korth didn't look like an alien predator, but like a leader standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. And in that moment, Tom knew that he had started something that couldn't be undone. The real battle had just begun. But this time, it wasn't for survival. It was for change. The experiment. The days that followed were unlike anything Tom had ever experienced. What had started as an attempt at survival had now become something else entirely. A fragile partnership, an uneasy truce. Korth, the once unshakable leader of the Arxians, was no longer the towering figure of terror Tom had first encountered. Instead, he seemed lost in a world of possibilities that were foreign to him. Tom could see it in Korth's eyes, the internal battle between everything he had ever known and the strange new path Tom had opened for him. The alien leader had agreed to Tom's request, though the terms were clear. Tom wasn't allowed to simply speak of peace or connection. He would have to show Korth the power of what he proposed. But Tom was willing to take that chance. He had no choice. If he wanted to survive, if he wanted to change Korth's heart, he needed to show him that pleasure could be a force more powerful than pain. It was an uncomfortable thought, but one that Tom was determined to make work. Korth led Tom through the vast hallways of the alien ship, his steps slow and deliberate. The ship itself was a labyrinth of metal and strange technologies, but Tom had grown used to its sterile, clinical atmosphere. Korth didn't speak as they walked, his mind clearly elsewhere, processing everything Tom had said, trying to make sense of the impossible. Finally, they arrived in a room that looked unlike anything Tom had ever seen. It was a chamber filled with strange, glowing symbols, and at the center stood a large, alien device. It was a mechanism of sorts, something that Tom couldn't begin to understand, but Korth approached it with the familiarity of someone who had spent a lifetime with it. This is where we conduct our most important tests, Korth said, his voice tinged with something close to reverence. It is where we separate the weak from the strong, where we extract the deepest truths from our prisoners. Tom glanced at the device, noting its intimidating design. It wasn't torture, but it wasn't mercy either. He had heard of this machine. The Arxians used it to strip away the mental walls of those they captured, forcing them to reveal secrets. It was brutal in its own way, but Tom knew that if he was going to make Korth see his point, this would have to be the place where it happened. "And this is where I'll prove that you're wrong," Tom said, meeting Korth's eyes with unwavering determination. Korth raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Prove what, human?" "That power doesn't come from causing pain. It comes from understanding," Tom replied. "You've spent your entire life dominating others, but it hasn't brought you peace. It hasn't brought you freedom. I'll show you that real strength is in the willingness to trust, to connect, to offer something better." Korth seemed to hesitate, but then he gestured for Tom to step forward. "Show me then," he said, his voice still cold but tinged with the uncertainty that had begun to grow. Tom stepped toward the machine, but instead of fear, there was something else in his chest, a sense of clarity, of purpose. This was the moment that would change everything. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He had to prove to Korth that connection and trust were stronger than anything they had known before. As he stood before the machine, Tom glanced back at Korth, who was watching intently. There was a strange shift in the air. The alien leader was no longer the predator. He was curious. Tom closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "I'm not afraid of this, Korth. I'm not afraid of you." Korth didn't respond, but Tom could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a test of survival anymore. It was a test of conviction. He had already chosen a path, and now there was no turning back. He stepped into the machine. The moment the device activated, a low hum filled the room. Tom's mind felt like it was being pulled in different directions, as if his thoughts were being laid bare. He could feel his body becoming more aware, more alive. The machine was designed to break him, to force his mind to unravel, but this time, something was different. The sensation wasn't pain. It was the opposite. It was the feeling of letting go, of surrendering to something larger than himself. The machine began to hum louder, and Tom focused all his energy on his thoughts. He thought of the Earth, of humanity, of everything he had been taught about strength and survival. But more than that, he thought of Korth, the alien leader who had spent his entire life in fear, who had never known a world without control and pain. "What if you let go?" Tom whispered to himself, even as the machine's pulse intensified. "What if you trusted for once? What if you allowed something more than fear to drive you?" He could feel it, the shift inside him. He wasn't just speaking to Korth anymore. He was speaking to himself. The machine had activated something deep within him. It was as though the walls he had built over the years were crumbling, and in their place was something new. The belief that strength could come from letting go, from giving rather than taking. The machine's hum reached a crescendo, then stopped suddenly. Tom opened his eyes. He was standing in the center of the room, but everything felt different. The world felt different. The machine had unlocked something, not just within him, but within the space around him. Korth stepped forward, his eyes wide with surprise. "What is this?" he murmured. Tom smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him that had never been there before. He had done it. He had shown Korth, in the most unexpected way, that strength could come from something as simple as trust and connection. The alien leader wasn't looking at him with contempt anymore. He wasn't just a prisoner to Korth. He had become something else. A teacher. "This," Tom said, stepping out of the machine and facing Korth, "is what true power feels like." For the first time, Korth didn't look like an alien. He didn't look like a predator. He looked human. And in that moment, Tom knew the battle wasn't over, but it had changed. The power had shifted, and the real test had just begun. A change of heart. Korth stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Tom. The transformation in the room was palpable, as if the very air had shifted. The machine Thesis at once symbolized dominance and control now lay dormant, its hum silenced. For a brief moment, Korth didn't appear like the ruthless leader he once was. Instead, he was a figure lost in thought, his eyes betraying an emotion Tom hadn't expected to see: uncertainty. Tom took a cautious step forward, but the alien didn't flinch. The change was subtle, but it was there. He could feel the weight of Korth's thoughts hanging between them, a tension that was no longer fueled by hostility, but by a quiet confusion. The same leader who had once boasted of his invincible power now seemed human, vulnerable. "You," Korth began, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "You have done something to me, human. I cannot deny it. But this feeling, it is not something I know. It is unsettling." Tom nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "You've spent your entire life holding on to control, believing that strength is about fear, about making others submit. But that's not true power, Korth. You're beginning to see that. The real strength comes from understanding, from allowing yourself to experience things beyond pain." Korth's expression was unreadable, but Tom could see the internal struggle warring within him. For the first time, Korth seemed to question everything he had ever known, his foundation of strength now cracked, leaving room for doubt. "Why would I want to give up everything I've fought for?" Korth muttered, as if trying to convince himself. "My people depend on my strength. Without it, we are nothing. And your ideas, they do not belong here. They are weak." Tom's heart sank, but he pressed on. "What if I told you that this is not weakness? What if you could lead with something more? Something that made your people stronger than fear ever could?" Korth's eyes narrowed. "And what would that be?" Tom's voice softened, but there was power in his words. "Trust, connection, empathy, these are the things that make us strong. You see it in us, Korth. You feel it yourself. You don't need to rule with fear. You can lead with compassion, and in doing so, you'll find strength that fear can never give." Korth stared at Tom, his features hardening once more. He stepped back, as if he needed space to process, to digest the words that Tom had spoken. His people had never known compassion. They had never allowed it to be part of their world. But now, with the seed of doubt planted in Korth's mind, the possibilities seemed endless. "You asked me to turn my back on everything," Korth said finally, his voice low. "To betray my people." "I'm not asking you to betray anyone," Tom replied. "I'm asking you to evolve, to show your people that true leadership isn't about control. It's about guiding them toward a better future, a future where they're not chained by fear." For a long moment, Korth was silent. The alien leader paced, as if trying to fight off the new ideas Tom had planted in his mind. He wasn't used to this kind of thinking. He wasn't used to being challenged in this way. But Tom could see the change. Korth's once indomitable resolve was weakening, and Tom was beginning to feel something more: hope. "I cannot change everything overnight," Korth said, his voice strained. "My people, they would not accept it." Tom stepped forward, his eyes locked on Korth. "Change starts with one person. It starts with you. You're the leader, Korth. If you show them a new way, they'll follow." Korth stopped pacing and looked Tom in the eyes, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. "I have spent my life believing that strength means dominance. You've shown me something I never thought possible." Tom nodded. "You don't need to dominate, Korth. You can lead by lifting others up, not by bringing them down." Korth looked at Tom, and for the first time, his gaze wasn't filled with the coldness of command, but with something that resembled hope. For a brief moment, it was as if Tom had bridged the gap between their worlds. "I will try," Korth said, the words heavy with meaning. "I will try to lead them differently, but it will take time." Tom smiled, relieved but still wary. "I know it won't be easy, but it's a start." Korth looked at the machine that had once been a symbol of his power, now standing silent in the corner of the room. It was a relic of a past life, a life he was slowly beginning to outgrow. The alien leader turned back to Tom, his expression still conflicted, but with a flicker of something else: determination. Your people. You are resilient, Korth said. Perhaps. I have much to learn. Tom's heart swelled with a sense of victory, though he knew the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning. But for the first time he felt confident that Korth was on the path to something greater. A change had begun, not just in the alien leader, but in the very fabric of the Arxian way of life. Korth walked to the control panel and tapped a few buttons. The doors of the chamber slid open, and the soft hum of the ship filled the space once more. You will be kept here for now, Korth said, his tone more neutral than before. But you will not be harmed. I will honor my word. Tom nodded, grateful, but his mind was already racing ahead. There was much work to be done. Korth's transformation wouldn't happen overnight, and it wouldn't be easy. The Arxians had been raised on fear, and they wouldn't relinquish it easily. But if he could convince Korth, then there was hope for the entire species. As Korth left the room, Tom's heart felt lighter than it had in days. The first step had been taken, but the true test would come when Korth's people discovered that their leader had begun to change. And Tom knew that when the time came, they would either embrace the new way or fight it tooth and nail. But for the first time since his capture, Tom wasn't afraid of what would happen next, because now he had something stronger than fear on his side: hope. The consequences. Days turned into weeks, and Tom found himself growing more accustomed to the alien ship. Korth kept his word, providing food and shelter, though the leader's initial coolness had shifted into something more complicated. There was a quiet tension in the air whenever they spoke, an unspoken understanding that both of them were walking a path they hadn't anticipated. But the real test was still to come. Korth's transformation was only the beginning. The true challenge lay in convincing the Arxian people to embrace the change. Tom knew that Korth's words, no matter how powerful, wouldn't be enough to sway an entire species that had been bred for dominance. The Arxians had lived by one rule: the strong ruled, and the weak were crushed beneath them. Could Korth truly convince them that this new way, one rooted in trust and compassion, was the path forward? Tom's answer came sooner than expected. Korth summoned him to the command center, a vast, imposing chamber filled with alien consoles and holographic displays. The room hummed with the energy of 1,000 calculations. At the center of the room stood Korth, his gaze distant and contemplative. The moment Tom entered, Korth didn't even acknowledge him at first. Instead, he stared at a hologram displaying the faces of several prominent Arxian leaders. They don't understand, Korth muttered, more to himself than to Tom. Tom stepped forward, his voice steady. What's happening? Korth turned slowly to face him. There was a hardness in his eyes, but also something else. A trace of exhaustion, of frustration. I've tried. I've spoken to them, but they refuse to see reason. They call me weak. They call me a traitor. I've been their leader for centuries, and now they question everything I say. Tom could feel the weight of Korth's words. The Arxian people were deeply rooted in their ways. They saw power as something to be seized, something to be taken, not shared. Korth had gone against their very nature, and now he was facing their wrath. They're scared, Korth, Tom said gently. They don't know how to live without fear. You're asking them to give up everything they've ever known. Korth clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. I thought I could change them. I thought I could show them a new way. But now they're turning on me. They want to strip me of my power. They want to replace me. Tom's heart sank. The rebellion had begun. The change that Korth had started was now at risk of being destroyed before it could even take root. He had hoped for a smooth transition, but now it was clear. The Arxians weren't ready, and neither was Korth. Do you know what they want, human? Korth's voice was cold, his anger palpable. They want me to show them that I'm still the leader they once feared. They want to see my strength, not my weakness. Tom's mind raced. This was the moment he had been dreading, the point where everything could fall apart. If Korth caved, if he gave in to the pressure of his people's expectations, all the progress they had made would be lost. But if Korth stood firm, If he continued to lead with the new principles Tom had shown him, then the path forward might still be possible. But Tom couldn't make that decision for him. "You have to decide, Korth," Tom said quietly. "Are you going to fight for what you believe in, or are you going to give in to the pressure of the past?" Korth's eyes flickered, the storm of emotions within him evident. He was torn between the life he had lived for centuries and the life he was now trying to build. He had spent so long ruling with fear and dominance. Could he really abandon all of that? "I am the leader of the Arxians," Korth finally said, his voice a low growl. "I am not weak." The words were a declaration, but they carried no weight of certainty. Tom could hear the fear in them, the doubt that still lingered within Korth's heart. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself," Tom said softly. "You've already shown more strength than anyone could ever expect by accepting change. But this is your choice. You can't lead out of fear anymore. You have to lead out of hope." Korth's gaze softened, just for a moment, but the hard, unyielding expression returned quickly. "Hope," he muttered, as though testing the word in his mouth. "It's not a weapon. It's not something that can lead an empire." Tom stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Hope is the strongest weapon of all. It's the one thing your people have never had, but you can give it to them. You can lead them in a way they've never known." Korth's eyes flickered toward the hologram of the Arxian leaders. The faces of his closest allies, his most trusted generals, were now twisted in contempt. They saw Korth's change as weakness, as a betrayal. They wanted him to return to the old ways, the brutal ways. They wanted the fear back. "I will not be their puppet," Korth said, his voice suddenly filled with resolve. "I will not return to the past, but I cannot lead them to the future if they do not follow." Tom watched Korth carefully, sensing the leader's internal struggle. This was the moment. Korth had to make a choice, not just for himself, but for the entire Arxian race. Would he stand up for the change he had started, or would he let his people drag him back into the abyss of fear? Korth turned away from the hologram, his expression hardened once more. "I will call for a council," he said, his tone final. "I will give them a choice. If they choose fear, then I will step down. But if they choose change, I will lead them." Tom nodded, knowing that the next few days would decide everything. The future of the Arxians, and possibly the entire galaxy, was now in Korth's hands. This was the point of no return. As Korth left the command seat, enter, Tom stood still, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The battle was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. But one thing was clear. The Arxians were at a crossroads, and Korth was about to make a decision that would shape their future forever, the new dawn. The council hall was a vast, cold chamber, filled with the imposing figures of Arxian leaders. The high walls were adorned with banners representing each faction within the Arxian Empire, symbols of power, conquest, and dominance. The room was thick with the weight of centuries of tradition, each seat filled with individuals who had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, yet none had witnessed a moment like this. Korth stood at the center, his posture strong but burdened, his eyes flickering over the assembly. His once ironclad resolve was now tempered by uncertainty. He had made his decision, but the pressure was unlike anything he had ever known. The Arxian people were not an easy race to lead, and the divide within their ranks had never been so clear. The whispers among the council were deafening. Some leaders glared at Korth, their eyes filled with scorn. Others stood in silence, unsure of where they stood. The tension was palpable. The Arxian Empire had been built on power, fear, and control, ideas Korth had begun to question, ideas he now knew were flawed. But could he convince the council that his vision was the future of the Empire? "You have called this council, Korth," a deep voice rumbled from the back. It was Vorn, a general known for his brutal tactics and unwavering loyalty to the old ways. What is it you wish to speak of? Have you lost your mind, leader? Your words are poison to our people. Korth stood tall, his eyes steady. I have not lost my mind, Vorn, he said, his voice calm but firm. What I am offering is not poison. It is freedom. The freedom to be more than just conquerors, to lead through understanding, not fear. The room erupted in murmurs, the leaders exchanging glances filled with confusion and disdain, but Korth didn't falter. He had made up his mind. He had chosen this path, not just for himself, but for his people. The choice was no longer about fear or control. It was about change. What do you think, human? Korth's voice cut through the chaos, turning to Tom, who stood silently by his side. Tom had been invited here, not as a prisoner, but as a participant. This was Korth's decision, but Tom's influence had been undeniable. Tell them what you believe. Tom stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment, the final test. He could see the skepticism in the eyes of the council, the leaders who had lived their lives by the very principles Korth was challenging. They were not going to be swayed easily. But Tom knew this was his only chance to make a difference, to show them what was possible. He cleared his throat, his voice steady and strong. I know that change is hard, he said, his eyes scanning the room. You've built your empire on fear and dominance, but it hasn't made you invincible. It's made you slaves to your own power. Power built on control, not trust, is a fragile thing. It's one mistake away from collapse. There was a ripple of anger in the room, but Tom pressed on. You've seen what Korth has done. He's shown you that there's more than one way to lead. He's shown you that power isn't about making others suffer. It's about lifting them up. If you want to lead an empire that stands the test of time, then you need to change. You need to be better than your past, because the world is changing, and if you don't change with it, you'll be left behind. Tom's words hung in the air, the silence stretching on. The council members were stunned. The boldness of his speech had unsettled them. The Arxians were not a race accustomed to being told what they were doing wrong, and yet here was a human, a stranger, urging them to embrace a new path. For some, it was too much to accept. You speak of change as if it is a simple thing, Vorn growled, standing from his seat. Do you think we can just cast aside the traditions of our people? The strength that has held us together for millennia? Tom's eyes locked with Vorn's. I don't think it will be easy. Change never is. But Korth has proven that it's possible. He's taken the first step. It's time for the rest of you to follow. You don't have to lose your power. You can lead in a way that builds, not destroys. A long pause followed. Korth stood motionless beside Tom, his presence commanding but unsure. The council members exchanged glances, whispers passing between them. Finally, the room went quiet. Then, a single voice spoke up. It was Asira, a young leader who had been loyal to Korth since the beginning. I've watched him, she said, her voice strong. I've seen the change in him. He is not the leader we knew, but perhaps that is what we need. We need someone who leads with more than just power. We need someone who leads with heart. The room was still, but there was a shift, a subtle change. Asira's words hung in the air like a spark in the darkness. For the first time, the council members seemed to be considering the possibility of a future different from the one they had always known. Korth looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over his people. His voice rang out, calm and resolute. I will not force you to follow me, but I will offer you a choice between the old ways, domination, fear, and control, or a new way, a way of trust, of connection, and of strength that comes from unity. If you choose the past, I will step aside, but if you choose the future, I will lead you. The room was silent for a long time, the weight of Korth's words pressing down on them. One by one, the leaders stood, their faces unreadable. The tension in the room was unbearable. But finally, Asira stepped forward, her eyes locked on Korth. I choose the future, she said, her voice clear. I choose a new way. A murmur spread through the room as others began to follow suit. One by one, they stood, each leader making their choice. Some hesitated, but the tide had turned. The future had arrived. Korth's face softened for the first time since this all began. He looked at Tom, a silent understanding passing between them. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. You have shown me a new path. Now, we walk it together. As the council chamber filled with the sound of agreement, Tom felt a surge of hope. The Arxians had chosen change. They had chosen to embrace something greater than fear. The empire that had once been built on pain and domination was now taking its first steps toward something new. It would not be easy, and it would not happen overnight. But the seeds of change had been planted, and for the first time, Tom felt that the future, whatever it held, was full of possibility. The end. Enjoyed the story? Like it and subscribe for more.